This is Hannibal from the HannibalTV.com, and as my special guest here today, we have the associate producer of two wrestling movies. One of them is one of the most famous wrestling movies ever done, The Wrestler, that starred Mickey Rourke, and the other is a little lesser known, but I did watch it and reviewed it on this channel, 350 Days, and it's up on the internet now. And you can also order it, which I'm sure Evan will tell us about. But how are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. And I appreciate all of your support over the years and happy to be on your show.
Well, we're happy to have you. And as we were talking off camera, what is an associate producer for those of us that don't know? What exactly was your role on these movies as the associate producer as opposed to the producer?
The executive producer of a movie is the money guy. He's making the business deals. So for example, The Wrestler was a $6 million indie and they had to raise that money. I was, as associate producer, the quote unquote wrestling guy. I did 5 or 6 casting calls. I brought in Romeo Roselli, Ron Killings, Necro Butcher, etc. so on. Not all of the guys, but most of the guys, the wrestlers that you see in The Wrestler, that was on me. I brought them in. Darren did the Darren Aronofsky. He ultimately decided who is picked and who isn't. But I brought in the cast. I did the casting calls, and I also brought in the ring and Mickey's stunt double, etc. so on. Anything really wrestling related. That sad convention scene, that was mostly my merchandise on the tables, and I organized it where it looked authentic, etc. so on. Basically, like I said, the wrestling guy. And ditto for 350 Days. Anything the producers, the money guys, needed, whether it was photos or video footage, that was on me. So the associate producer works for the executive producers, in 10 words or less.
How did you become involved as the associate producer for The Wrestler?
This is a wild story. I was an agent in professional wrestling, and I had booked Nikolai Volkov and Johnny Valiant, and we were doing an autograph signing at a wrestling store in Queens, Jack Sabbath's store. He has multiple stores at this point, but this was 15 years ago. And basically, the executive producer's best friend walks in and says to me, quote, "You guys would be perfect for this movie." And, we exchanged business cards and I didn't think much of it. And months went by and, Aronofsky's a very busy, world-class director. And suddenly I get a call and next thing I know, I'm in a meeting with Aronofsky, the executive producer, Scott Franklin, the screenwriter, and other people involved in the film. And I'm there with Johnny Valiant, Nikolai Volkov, the late Tiger Khan, who wrestled for the Hearts in Calgary, dear friend of mine, and also Nikita Brezhnikov, who was Nikolai Volkov's shoot manager, booked them all over the Indies and for autograph signings, much like I did for Johnny Valiant. And basically, we're sitting, eating, drinking, and Nikolai was just charming and funny and warm, and Johnny was like the funniest guy alive. He actually did stand-up comedy. We all hit it off. And next thing I know, Scott Franklin meets with me and he says, "I'd like to offer you the associate producer role in our film." And, I took it and the rest is history. I mean, it was an incredible experience and I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the film and the making of the film. But it was really, one of the best experiences of my life. And Aronofsky's a true artist. His mom's a school teacher. He's a down-to-earth guy. The whole thing was a joy, really.
Did you have any expectations that it was going to blow up to be as huge as it was?
Am I allowed to curse on your show?
Of course, yes.
Well, at the wrap party, after it was all filmed, and let me just say this because people have no idea. From start to finish, that project was 7 years from the time I met them to the time it was done filming. The filming was only seven 5-day weeks. But what people don't understand with movies is we had to raise $6 million and we were trying to raise $18 million. Okay, so we're at the wrap party. The cast is there, the crew, Manhattan, venue, nice club. And Aronofsky makes a speech, and I'll never forget it. And he says, "quote I don't know what the fuck we have, but we have something." And I knew right there because this guy's a true artist. I mean, brilliant, brilliant artist. And if you haven't seen any of his other films, I mean, they skew it dark. I mean, The Wrestler was a really dark film, and so are his others. But when he gave it that seal of approval, I knew we were on to big things. And we were at the New York Film Festival at Lincoln Center, 2,300 seats, sold out, $40 a ticket. And I'm sitting there with my girlfriend, and who's now my wife. And at one point, she looks at the screen, she looks at me, she looks at the screen, she looks at me. She goes, "That's you. That's you." Because Aronofsky threw me in on a whim, and I acted in the film with Mickey. And the point, how did we know it was going to blow up? People were sitting in that crowd, 2,300 people crying. I'm looking all around me. When Mickey goes, "I'm just a broken down piece of meat," to his daughter, everybody's crying. And I'm like, this works. It works. And then when the film ended, spontaneous standing ovation. And I just sat there after 7 years off and on working on this. I just sat there and went, this is the best night of my life right here. Best night of my life. Because you were rewarded with all the hard work, the countless hours, the blood, sweat, and tears. We would shoot at indie shows. Basically, I was on the road with Aronofsky and Scott Franklin and Mickey and everybody for 6 months before shooting, because Aronofsky wanted it to ring true. And we were at an indie show, a Ring of Honor show, and we're trying to film certain segments, and the audience is getting angry. They're actually like, "We just want to watch wrestling. We don't care what you guys are doing." So Aronofsky actually gets in the ring, gets on the mic, and goes, guys, we're going to do good by you. Just let us shoot. We'll be out of here in 20 minutes. Just let us shoot, They were going to turn on us. It was a real wrestling crowd. We didn't have the budget for extras at these events most of the times. These were real fans, and they didn't want us there. So looking back, it was comical, but so Aronofsky's hitting this in 1, 2, 3 takes. He didn't have the luxury of doing 20 different angles. It was like guerrilla filmmaking. It was a wild experience, a wild ride. And the cinematographer was this little French woman, and who did mostly art films in Europe. She didn't know what she had gotten herself into. There were times like she's like, "Oh my God, what's going on here? Here's Necro Butcher and all this craziness." And when the smoke cleared, it was just like I said, a great experience. Very proud of it.
It's interesting that you bring up the indie shows because a fan had a question here. At the indie shows, did they try to pass Mickey Rourke off as a real wrestler?
Oh no, absolutely not. No. He did have a stunt double, Kid USA, a New York-based indie wrestler. But Mickey took a lot of the bumps. I mean, you couldn't risk the star of the movie doing the aerial stuff for the most part. But Mickey got hurt at one point. He was actually out for a week or two. He was a guy in his early 50s at the time. He had never done this. He had boxed. He had been a boxer. He's a legit tough guy, nice guy, quote unquote tortured artist. But he was not a professional wrestler, and we did not try to pass him off. We were shooting scenes from the film, and I was there. That poignant final scene in the Ring of Honor ring when he does the speech and you hear his heart beating and he's about to have a heart attack. And, everybody knew it was Mickey Rourke. We weren't trying to scam anybody.
Matt R would like to know if there was any serious injuries during the filming.
Well, like I said, Mickey did get hurt, but he was back. I would say, this is already 15 years ago, so I'm just going on memory. I would say 2 weeks later, he was back. It was nothing major. But yeah, so I wouldn't say there were serious injuries, but there were injuries. I mean, it was rough. It was, and Mickey's a tough guy. He wasn't scared to do anything that we asked of him.
This is an interesting question. Apparently, Hulk Hogan has claimed that he was offered the role of Randy the Ram. Is there any?
I was involved with all the casting. I never heard this. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say I was with Darren 24/7 for all 7 years of it, but I never heard this. At one point, we were interested in Nicolas Cage because we could not get the $18 million funding off of Mickey at the time. Mickey's star had kind of declined 2007, 2008 when we were about to do this. And Nicolas Cage was under consideration. But I sat there with Darren one day and he said to me, he goes, Evan, you have to understand, Nicolas Cage is a walking corporation. He has an agent, a manager, a hairstylist, a trainer, etc., so on. He goes, Mickey's here with his one buddy, this tough guy. I don't even know what exactly his role was. It was like Mickey's assistant. And, it was just easy. And ultimately, Darren's an artist. And he said to me, Evan, and this is a quote, he goes, Mickey's the right guy for this. And he looked the part. And what he said to me about Nicolas Cage, thank you, Larry Bird, and I enjoyed you in the NBA as well. So what Mickey looked the part. He looked beaten down, and Darren said to me, quote, Nicolas Cage looks too healthy. He looks too healthy. And I brought in Lanny Poffo for a reading. Lanny Poffo's a dear friend of mine, and he said the same thing. He said, Evan, Lanny looks too healthy. The guy looks great. He's not right for this movie. And this is interesting. That autograph scene, that really sad autograph scene, what had happened was, like I said, for about 6 months, every weekend, we were on the road doing anything wrestling related, including conventions and indie shows. So I take Darren and the crew to this convention in Jersey. And sitting there was basically the WWE Hall of Fame. It was Lou Albano, Nikolai, Iron Sheik, Moolah, Mae Young, etc. It was all these like all-time legends. And there was nobody there. There was nobody there. There was like 20 fans, 25. It was sad. And Darren, like I said, Darren's a sensitive guy. He's an artist. He's like, Evan, where is everybody? Where is everybody? I go, Darren, it's like this sometimes, So that scene was not in the film. It was not initially in the script. And immediately the screenwriter added that. There were 5 or 6 versions of the script over the 7 years. And basically, I critiqued it and I said, this rang true wrestling-wise. This didn't. I mean, I'm not a screenwriter, but I knew the wrestling end of it. So, for example, there was one scene in the original script where Randy the Ram is blading himself and everybody's at the, at the curtain watching like this is a big deal. And I said, this would not be a big deal. Nobody would care. It's just another day at the office. I said back in the 80s, these guys were blading every night of the week. A lot of these guys. It would not be anything like that. It doesn't ring true. And they took that out of the initial screenplay. So it was a process, but ultimately, to Aronofsky's credit, he wanted it to ring true, and ultimately, I think it did. And to the point where guys like Jim Cornette, and I love Cornette, the Midnight Express is my all-time favorite tag team. Cornette goes, "We don't all live in trailer parks." And I'm like, I know that. I know that. Nikolai was a dear friend. He had a beautiful farm in Maryland. You know, not everybody is broke and down and out, but some are. And like I said, Aronofsky's films, you know, always rang dark. Everything he's done. If you saw Mother, the movie Mother, it's absolutely insane how dark it is. So, you know, that's the reality of it all. And for most part, the wrestling community embraced us. Roddy Piper said it made him cry, and other people have told me the same. And, you know, we're, like I said, I'm very proud of it from a film point of view. And the fact that, you know, unfortunately, without pensions and 401ks and health benefits, a lot of these guys do not end up well. And when the fans do they all pissed away fortunes on wine, women, and song. Let me tell you guys, a lot of the wrestlers before the Hulkamania era never broke $100,000 main eventing all over the world. They never broke $100,000 a year. They're on the road 300 plus days a year, the stars, sending money back home. They did not all piss it away on wine, women, and song. That's a myth. And some did, but the truth with anything is always somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, Billy Graham, for instance, who's in your 350-day movie, can't understand why he's had financial problems, but they weren't making huge paydays back then. $5,000 was what you would get for selling out Madison Square Garden in the main event.
And that was later. In the 70s, they made less than that. You know, a lot of the main event Madison Square Garden guys didn't even get $5,000. And I can assure you that Elton John or Rod Stewart or Mick Jagger, who are headlining the same arena, got a lot more than $5,000. You know, the promoters did not take care of these guys. And I'll break down some math for you. Bruno, who was the champion in the 70s, was making about $250,000, which is a lot of money back then. But when you're working hundreds of days a year, it's not a windfall. So let's say in the mid 80s, when the better money started to come, and guys like Nikolai are pulling in $400,000 a year, well, they're working over 300 days a year to get that $400,000. So do the math. It's not a windfall, and I'm talking main events and co-features. And again, you're sending money back home for your wife and kids. You're on the road, 3 meals a day, hotels, taxes, which the fans never take into consideration. And, you know, none of it, let me put it to you this way, 10 words or less, the main idea of the story, these guys did not get paid what they were worth back in those days. And again, not to belabor a point, no pensions, 401ks, or health benefits. Basically, the body gives out at some point. The wrestlers call it their bump card. There's only so many bumps on your bump card. Your knee goes out, your shoulder goes out, something goes out. And at some point, you're done. And not all of these guys had a trade to fall back on or a college education. And some of the guys, I'm not going to name names, but some of the guys who headlined Madison Square Garden eventually pushed the broom or worked the door at the strip club or the rock club or the nightclub or whatnot. And it wasn't a happy end, you know, to guys who entertained millions around the world and should have had millions for what they did, you know. And you know, don't be on the side of the promoters. For the most part, the vast majority were not taken care of, particularly, you know, in the old school days.
Yeah, I know Bad News Brown was a mall security guard at the time.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I'm not making it up. Yeah, you're verifying it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many situations. Joe LeDuc was working in a pawn shop shortly before he died. My friend happened to walk into one, and he got so depressed seeing that this big star who used to be really popular was just working as a cashier at a pawn shop. So
Mr. Fuji was ripping tickets in a movie theater. I mean, the fans don't go back far enough, a lot of them. This guy was headlining the Garden against Pedro Morales. This guy was main eventing with Tanaka and Fuji as tag champs. I mean, this was a main event, headlined the Cow Palace in San Francisco. Main event guy. You shouldn't have to be ripping tickets when you're an old man in a movie theater. It's they deserve better, most of these guys. And sure, there was some that pissed it away, but you can't make a blanket statement. It's they never made the money to piss it away.
TNT Pro Wrestling Bookings wants to know, will there ever be a Wrestler 2, do you think?
On Aronofsky's end, it was done. It was done. The screenwriter actually said to me, he said, when you hear his heart beating, he's having a heart attack, and he's either going to die in that ring in that last scene, or eventually he's going to die in the ring. Why? Because Randy the Ram could not function in society. He couldn't make it. Him and the daughter fell apart. Him and the girlfriend fell apart. Marissa Tomei. He couldn't function in the real world, and the screenwriter said straight out, whether in that scene or in the near future, he was going to die in the ring. So on their end, it's over. I mean, anything can happen. I see endless spin-offs of shows and movies, but I doubt it's going to come from Aronofsky. I've heard nothing over the years. I mean, at some point they could do a director's cut, or some special anniversary DVD or Criterion edition or whatnot, but as far as a sequel, not that I'm aware of.
Have you heard this story about the altercation between Mickey Rourke and Jim Duggan at a WrestleMania shortly after the wrestler?
Not at all. To be honest, no. So whether it happened or it's a rumor, you would know more than I would.
Yeah, Jim claimed it happened, but I was wondering, how was Mickey Rourke on the set? Was he a Hollywood type, or was he more down to earth?
I never saw him say no to an autograph, a photo. The guy couldn't be any nicer. And, I haven't seen him since we filmed The Wrestler, so I don't need to butter him up or whatnot. I'm being honest. The guy couldn't have been any nicer. But, he is a quote unquote tortured artist. I asked him once, I said, what did you think of the movie? And he looks at me and he goes, I can't watch it. It reminds me too much of my career. He was at the top box office. Then, he actually left. He was boxing. The guy was getting punched in the face. This isn't a traditional, career path for a top movie star. In the 80s, he did Diner, and he was in a lot of hits in the 80s. He was a big star. To walk away to go into boxing is not a normal career trajectory in movies. I mean, these guys are worried about their face. They don't want to get punched in the face. So yeah, he's a tortured artist for sure, but I'm not saying that as criticism. This guy is as great an actor as you'll ever see. He won the Golden Globe that year for The Wrestler. Thank you, Ralph. He won the Golden Globe, best actor in the world, and he was nominated for the Oscar, and he lost to Sean Penn in Milk, which is no disgrace. So, what I always say is, if I compare what Mickey did in The Wrestler to Marlon Brando, and On the Waterfront, when Brando goes, I could have been a contender. It's a classic line. Some of the young guys might not know it, but I'm older. And Mickey, like I said before, when he does, I'm just a broken down piece of meat, I think that line is going to be iconic. I think his performance is going to be iconic. And I think 100 years from now, that movie will stand up and people will still be watching it.
There was someone that was asking earlier if Randy the Ram was based on Jake the Snake. I've heard a lot of people say it was based on Greg Valentine.
Well, let me just say this. Aronofsky and the crew, the creators of the film, these guys were mid 80s. These guys were mid 80s WWF Hulkamania era wrestling fans. These were the guys that they knew. So it was a composite of all of these guys. And but Mickey did spend a lot of time while we were in the process of doing this with Greg Valentine. If anybody should get credit, it's Greg Valentine. And you know, Greg is a dear friend of mine. He's stayed with me, with my wife, who just walked across your screen. Greg has stayed with us, and Greg is the real deal. If people, if they have not seen Greg, you know, in his prime, the guy was amazing. He would headline Madison Square Garden time and time again. I saw him do a 1 hour Broadway with Bob Backlund at the Garden. At one point, they actually held up the title in New York with this strange angle where for 1 month in New York only, we didn't know if Backlund or Valentine was the champ, and then they had the rematch, and Backlund beat him. But Greg was amazing, just amazing. And, you know, like Randy the Ram, Greg, you know, stayed on, you know, into his 70s. I mean, you know, sometimes you just hang in there a little too long, and people don't know or never saw you at your peak. But let me tell you, I'm jaded. I've been going to wrestling since 1974. I've been watching since 72, 50 years. And Greg in his prime was as great as anybody. Believe me. You know, if you saw him 20 years past his peak, you might not, you know, agree. But Valentine on top at the Garden, boy, yeah, you couldn't see much better than him. Trust me.
Now,
Yeah. Valentine and Wahoo, absolutely, Matt. Yeah, absolutely.
I haven't seen that, but I'm sure it would have been hard hitting.
Yeah, I broke Wahoo's leg. Remember?
Yeah. Now I remember the shirt.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Greg Valentine, he's also in your 350 Days movie. Which how did you become involved in producing that? And could you tell us about that? A lot of fans might not have heard about it, as it was a little lesser known than the wrestler.
Oh, absolutely. So another Darren Antola, by sheer coincidence, another Darren, he approached me, and he pitched me 350 Days. And 350 Days is a documentary. And the meaning of the title is that the champions were literally on the road 350 days. A guy like Ric Flair or the NWA champions. And we list as the stars. Superstar Billy Graham and Bret Hart, you know, because they have a lot of screen time in there. But there's 36 legends in there. Bret Hart said to us, I wrestled 330 days a year as world champion. Greg said to us, I wrestled 320 days when I was on top. 320 days. Okay? So the theme of the movie is, yeah, Greg always made wrestling look real. He absolutely did. Just like his dad, Johnny Valentine. But anyway, the idea is, what does 350 or 330 or 320 days on the road do to your body, your psyche, your marriage, your relationship with your kids? Wrestlers hate the word fake, because they'll go, you know, my knee replacement wasn't fake, my shoulder replacement wasn't fake, my hip replacement, my 3 divorces, my kid's not talking to me because I was never home. None of that is fake. And the toll that it all took on them. And so Darren pitched this to me. And at first I was resistant, because I was like, you can't top the wrestler. I'm just like, you can't top the wrestler. But he's a blue collar guy. He loved the 80s guys just like I did. He grew up on the same things I did. He's a little younger than me, but we had the same Morocco, the same favorites. And basically, I saw his heart was in it. I said, Darren, the movie I want you to make, I said, picture a 70-year-old woman who never watched wrestling. I said, make her cry. I said, that's the movie to make. You don't need another, wrestling documentary with the fanboys, with the $5,000 worth of merchandise in their man cave. I said, it's been done to death. I said, let these guys pour their hearts out. And that's exactly what we ended up doing. And they're talking about the guilt they had. They're cheating on their wives. They're not with their kids. They missed graduation. They missed it. They missed the birth of their kid. They missed their kid's wedding when they're, older. They were always on the road. Think about it. Think about it. Starrcade was Christmas. Survivor Series was Thanksgiving. They were never home, these guys. And that's the documentary that we made, and very proud of it also. It got critical acclaim. You don't have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy it, but of course it helps. You'll know who all these guys are. And I tell people all the time, I could watch Billy Graham read the phone book, I'd be riveted. I mean, this guy's as charismatic and as great a talker as anybody in history. I mean, I can't think of too many people on Billy Graham's level as a promo guy. And there he is throughout the movie, pouring his heart out. And, I'm a huge Billy Graham mark. I saw him as champion in his prime. People have no idea. The younger fans who do Bruno and Billy Graham and Pedro Morales, they just punched and kicked. They have no idea. These guys would walk down the aisle at Madison Square Garden, 22,000 people sold out, no pyro, no music, no nothing. The building would shake just from pure charisma. Bruno and Billy Graham was like Superman and Lex Luthor. It was like Batman and the Joker. You can't get this from watching a grainy videotape. You had to be there. And believe me, I know Dory Funk Jr. and Jack Briscoe and Nick Bockwinkel could wrestle circles around a Bruno, but we were blue collar marks. We were marks. I was a kid, and every time these guys are getting punched and kicked, you felt it. It was like they were kicking you. It wasn't. Everybody was smartened up. It was a different time and place. It's 50 years ago. It was a different world. There was no internet. The sheets were barely in existence at this time. It was a very closed world. And you have to take something else into consideration. I'm a kid. I'm there with my dad. My dad was a World War II veteran. And, there's Baron von Raschke headlining in the Garden. There's Waldo von Erich, these nasty villains and, these blue collar guys. It's like their blood was boiling. It was magic. It was magic. So you can't just go, oh, they were just punching and kicking. Yeah. And I'm not one of these guys who there was no good wrestling since the territories. That's nonsense. I love Bryan Danielson and Okada, Pentagon and Phoenix and all these guys. I mean, these guys are artists also. But Will Ospreay, when people go, oh, they're all just spot monkeys today, that's nonsense also. But you can't criticize Billy Graham to me. The guy's one of my heroes. I mean, the building shook. It's the best way I could explain it.
And you guys did put him in a great suite for the filming of that, because I was with him that weekend. I remember he was all proud that you guys had got him a suite at the hotel, and it was very nice. But I think Billy Graham said it best when he said that promo about pandemonium, where you could hear the pandemonium in the Garden, cheering and booing and people throwing trash, like there was electricity in the air.
Yeah, I was there one night. Bruno wrestled Billy Graham. Gorilla Monsoon was the referee. So Billy goes like this, like I quit. He goes back to the dressing room. Next thing you know, Monsoon chases after him. And a minute or two later, Billy Graham's on Monsoon's shoulders coming, and Monsoon dumps him back in the ring. Bruno pounces on him. It was like the Roman Colosseum. It was a roar, like this primitive roar. I mean, like bloodlust. You know, everybody wanted Bruno to murder him because everybody was marks, and Bruno was like our like half god. You know, he was such a hero to us. And yeah, man, it's like you can't explain this to some of the fans today. They're just like, oh, they're just meat and potatoes, punch kick, hide a foreign object. You know, they just don't get it because they weren't there to get it.
What was your favorite scene in 350 Days out of all the scenes that are in that film?
Um, I thought it was ironic and powerful that when they were asked, "Would you do it again?" and Billy Graham actually starts laughing, like all the hell the guy went through, you know, on the road all those years. He goes, "Yeah, I would do it again. I would do it again." And let me just say this: Johnny Valiant was a dear friend of mine. He's not in the movie, but Johnny Valiant was telling me he wrestled in front of oil sheiks in the Middle East, 3 in the morning, and he looks out in the crowd and there wasn't a single woman in the audience because that was the culture at the time. And he said how surreal it was. He's like, I'm a kid from Pittsburgh. Here I am wrestling in Saudi Arabia, 3 in the morning in front of oil sheiks. Okay. Butcher Paul Vachon, who is in 350 Days, he was telling me he wrestled the Great Gama in India, and there was 100,000 people there, you know? So it's the same thing. You got these blue collar guys. They see the world on the promoter's dime, these exotic places, you know, they're whining and dining literally with kings and queens and oil sheiks. And then you have the other end of it where, you know, you're in some dingy, you know, VFW hall or bingo hall, and it's not glamorous whatsoever, or you're at some convention and some slime ball agent is, you know, nickel and diming you, or, you know, I was telling a story recently. You know, I was Johnny Valiant's shoot manager. I got him bookings for his comedy. He had a one-man comedy show, and occasionally he would still wrestle. So one night he's wrestling out in Jersey on an indie. The main event is Johnny Valiant against Jimmy Snuka. Snuka was the face, Johnny was the heel. So they put on a good show. They were both in their 50s. You know, they did what you know, their bodies allowed them to do. The fans were happy. The charisma was off the charts. So me as the agent, I go to get Johnny's money, and the promoter does the, well, you know, it wasn't a great house. I go, listen, man, every seat was filled. These guys did their part. Pay them what you promised them. And I stood my ground. And I'm not a tough guy, you know. I'm standing my ground for the wrestlers. That's the irony of it. And the guy's like, well. Finally, he gives you the payday, which was not a massive payday by any stretch of the imagination to begin with. And never booked him again. It's, oh, this guy's a headache because he asked for the money he was promised, you know. And you know, so I tell people, I've met some great people in this business. Some of my closest friends, dearest friends, you know, not just the wrestlers, you know, fans and you know, just promoters. Some of the promoters are great. Some of the indie promoters, they're from the heart. They're not all dirtbags. But there are guys in this business I wouldn't spit on if they were on fire. And you see real extremes in this business. And like I said at the top of the show, and I'm not saying it to buddy up, but you've always been supportive of everything I've done, including 350 Days. And I'm grateful because, you know, most people's like, well, if you're not, paying me this or that. We're not gonna plug it or hype it or whatnot. And so I'm grateful to you, and you meet a lot of great people in this business. But the other side of it is pretty disgusting sometimes.
Yeah, I always find it funny when some of these WWE wrestlers who have been trained by WWE since they first started, so they've always been paid, talk about when they get released, they're excited to experience the indies. But as you mentioned, and it has happened to me countless times, the promoters will either try to short you or not pay you very regularly on the indies.
A lot of times it's pay as you will. The local indie guys, the weekend warriors, they get an envelope and they don't even know what they're going to be paid. They get $20, $25, $50. Here's some money for gas. Here's some money for tolls. A lot of times they just give them like some food and a beer. I mean, it's not glamorous for the most part. And I was at a convention once with Johnny Valiant, and we're literally waiting online to get paid with the other wrestlers, and they're taking the pay out of the door from that night. So they're starting with 50s, then they're down to 20s, and we're still like in the back of the line, then they're down to 10s. And luckily, he got his money that night. And there were other nights, we just don't have it. It could be really ugly, and a lot of these guys after a while they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just don't want to do this anymore. And all of a sudden you don't see them. They're not at the conventions. They're not at the indies. They just had enough because if they pay you 4 times and they don't pay you the 5th time, that's what they used to do to the wrestlers in Puerto Rico. They get paid for several weeks, and then 1 week they don't get paid, and it's like, oh, that's just the way the business is.
Yeah, that actually happened to me in Puerto Rico, and that Carlos Colon is known for that.
Well, there you go.
He'll give you half. Then 1 week he'll give you half, and I'll catch up with you. And then it never catches up, and it just becomes eventually way too much that the people leave. But in the end, they save money by doing that.
Yeah, but you don't. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of wrestlers from the 350 Days movie have actually passed away now, sadly, because that was recorded, I think, at least in 2013. You were still filming it because I think that's when you recorded Billy's scenes.
It was filmed over 6 years, just like the wrestler took 7 years. So at this point, off the top of my head, guys in the movie, Paul Orndorff is gone. Ox Baker, George the Animal Steele, Larry Sharp. I mean, so on and so forth down the line. A lot of these guys, Snuka. I mean, there's over a dozen guys in that movie who are no longer with us. Don Leo Jonathan, you're from Canada. The younger fans don't know how great Don Leo Jonathan was. Oh my God! When I was a kid, this guy was on top. This was a giant who could move. This guy could move. He wasn't like a big lumbering guy. He was remarkable, Don Leo. And there's a little snippet with Killer Kowalski in there. They're all gone. I mean, not everybody. I mean, Bret Hart's in the movie, and Greg and Tito, but a chunk of that cast. The Wolfman from Canada is in that. When I was a kid, I saw Bruno wrestle the Wolfman. A lot of the younger fans aren't even familiar with him, but he was out of Canada. He lived in Canada. Yeah.
Angelo Mosca, I believe, was also.
Mosca just passed also recently. Yeah.
And Ox Baker too. I think you may have mentioned him.
Ox Baker, a lot of people say stole the movie because the guy's just funny. The guy had incredible charisma, off the charts charisma, and just very funny. A lot of people loved Ox Baker in the movie.
What are your thoughts on the whole Jimmy Snuka controversy as someone that knew him and is from the area where all that took place? You might have some inside information.
I don't think anybody has inside information because Jimmy at the end had legit Alzheimer's. He had legit Alzheimer's. I don't think he knew what happened. So I wasn't there. I certainly don't know what happened. All I could tell you is the Jimmy I knew as an older guy was the sweetest guy in the world, and believe me, I'm not endorsing, any kind of abusing women or whatnot, but all I could say is the Jimmy I knew was a sweet guy, and people change, people evolve and change, and that's that. I can't say what happened in a room I wasn't in, honestly, and I'm not trying to bullshit anybody.
Now, you've been around the wrestling business a long time. As you said, you were a manager before the wrestler even happened. What's the craziest story you could share with us about something you've experienced in the business? I'm sure there's a lot.
This is actually a funny story. 2003 or 2004, September 11. September 11. I'm getting on one of those little puddle jumper 20-seater planes with Johnny Valiant from one gig to back home, and the pilot looked like every bad guy in every action movie you've ever seen. This guy looked like Lee Van Cleef, for the older fans who know old school bad guys in movies. Okay, so I'm looking at Johnny. Johnny's looking at me. It's the anniversary of September 11. So we're like, do we get on this plane? And if we get on this plane, are we going to get home in one piece? So eventually, in those little planes, when you hit, those air pockets, like the whole plane starts vibrating, and we're like, this is it. This is it. We're going down. So it was scary, but it was comical at the same time. And Johnny always told that story after, because this guy looked like a bad guy in a movie, and he was the pilot of this plane on 9/11, the anniversary 2 or 3 years later, when it was still very fresh in everybody's mind. And I'm a New Yorker, so 9/11, isn't like some distant, far away thing. And yeah, man, that was probably the craziest thing that ever happened.
And as far as wrestlers you've encountered, who would you say is the nicest, and who would you say is the biggest asshole you've dealt with over the years?
The first question is easy. Nikolai Volkov was the nicest. Nice. Bret Hart said, not in the movie, publicly, after Nikolai died, he said Nikolai Volkov was the nicest wrestler I ever met, and Bret Hart met everybody. Okay, and I've met plenty. Nikolai called me from a dear friend. He called me from his hospital bed. He said, Evan, they cleared out an infection in my chest. I'm going home. And his wife found him dead in bed a few days later. And, I was devastated because, one, he was a good friend. Two, he would just call you to talk, not to get anything from you, not to get booked, just how are you? How's your mother? He had met my mother. I knew him so long. And, the nicest guy you ever want to meet. Really, really. As far as a total asshole in wrestling, I knew to avoid certain people. As somebody who worked as an agent and booked guys, you always knew this guy could be volatile. This guy has a drug issue. This guy has a drinking problem. You knew who to avoid and who, So I really couldn't say, because nobody really mistreated me, because I always treated these guys with respect and, business wise, treated them fairly and to the penny, whatever we agreed on. And so, I'm not trying to avoid your question, honestly. I can't think of anybody that was like really nasty to me. I remember as a kid, like certain guys wouldn't sign an autograph or whatnot, you know. Oh, I'll tell you this, your viewers will find this entertaining. So I'm a kid standing outside of Madison Square Garden. Billy Graham signing, Lou Albano signing, and autographs outside the Garden. The Grand Wizard signing, okay? Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant would never sign for us kids. They would just walk by like we weren't there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but as a kid, it was very disillusioning when your heroes were kind of assholes to us. We were little kids, we weren't we weren't autograph collectors who were selling something on the internet. We were just kids marking out for these guys. And yeah, Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant would never sign for us. Yeah. So
you're not the only person that said that about Andre. Many people have said he didn't like signing autographs. And actually, that happened with me as a kid, too. The Rock was driving with the Sultan Rikishi, and The Rock was Rocky Maivia at the time, and he wouldn't sign. And there's the Sultan who had a line. And I remember The Rock, he had his hand up like this over his head.
Yeah.
And his head bent down in the back of the car as the baby face not wanting to sign.
Well, I'll tell you, percentage-wise, the heels generally were nicer. They generally were nicer. Not always. I mean, there were some faces who were very friendly too. Tito was nice, and JYD was nice. And, I was a kid. I'd stand outside the Garden before and after the show and, just collect autographs. And but I'll tell you something. The British Bulldogs always had a bad reputation. They were always nice. They always stopped and signed. I mean,
Now, as far as where can people watch 350 Days, I know you guys are selling the DVD still. Where can people pick that up?
Well, 350 Days, themovie.com. If you want to pick up the DVD or Blu-ray or merchandise, you can watch it for free on Tubi, Amazon Prime. It's not hard to find. It's on every major cable system. It's not on Netflix. It's on Amazon Prime, but most major systems you could find it. We have worldwide distribution. The distributor is Gravitas, the name of the company, and I think like I said, you don't have to be an old school fan to appreciate it. You don't even have to be a wrestling fan. It's a quality film. It's moving. It's funny, and Jim just said he always heard the heels nicer than the baby faces. Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, that's what I found a lot of the times, but. It depends. It depends.
Well, actually, that reminds me. Somebody asked earlier about the original Sheik, if you had any stories about him from when you were a kid, or did you ever encounter him? Because there's a guy who I would imagine, even as a heel, would probably never sign an autograph.
I have an even better story. At one point, I was flown out to Georgia to potentially do the Iron Sheik's book. I'm a writer. I'm senior editor at ProWrestlingStories.com. And so I'm interviewing him in his house. And basically, the interview is like a loop. It's like a loop. He just would say the same thing over and over again. That rock star Hulk Hogan wouldn't put over the Sheik. That jabroni. And he would just say the same thing for like 45 minutes. And ultimately, I said to his manager at the time, I said, look, I'm a big fan of the Iron Sheik. I mean, he was tremendous in his heyday. I saw him headline the Garden. But I don't think you're going to get a book out of him, at least not at that point in his life. This was a good 20 years ago. And basically, I would put this old school tape recorder in front of him, and he would say the same thing. It was like a loop that played in his head. And I go, you don't have a 200 or 300 page book here. You have like a repeated loop that like the record is skipping. That's the only way I could explain it. It was pretty surreal. The guy couldn't be any nicer. I mean, he treated us like gold. Oh, Mr. Evan, would you like a cookie? I'm like, okay, Sheik. Would you like some juice? Okay. The guy was a sweet guy, but as far as interviewing him, or at least at that time in his life, it wasn't happening. It just wasn't happening.
Yeah, that reminds me, speaking of Nikolai, the last time I interviewed him, he was talking to me about his concern for the Iron Sheik's health. And here we are, I think maybe 5 years later, and the Iron Sheik is still alive somehow.
I'm not a gambler by any stretch of the imagination, but if somebody had said to me years ago, Evan, I'll bet you $5,000, that the Sheik outlives Nikolai, I would have taken Nikolai, of course. Nikolai, I roomed with Nikolai on the road when we were doing autograph signings. This guy was early to bed, early to rise, vegan, water, vitamins. This guy was a health fanatic. If anybody told me the Iron Sheik would outlive Nikolai, I would have said, you're nuts. You're nuts. And 71. That's not even old by today's standards. And Johnny Valiant, ironically, was 71. Johnny Valiant, Pittsburgh guy, blue collar guy, crossing the street in Pittsburgh early in the morning, crossing the street. It's rainy, it's foggy, 6 a.m. or whatnot, approximately. Car just hits him and kills him. Just hits him and kills him. I mean, I felt like I got hit by that car. I was shell shocked for weeks, and just a freak accident. So both these guys are gone at 71. The Sheik is going to live to 101 and prove everybody wrong. That's what's going to happen. Mark my words.
Yeah, I believe it. And as far as where people can follow you on social media, we know you're on Facebook. Is there anywhere else they can look you up?
I have a old school page called Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast. That's our podcast, actually. You can check that out. And Evan Ginzburg's Old School Wrestling Memories. And thank you. Jay Smith says, love luscious Johnny V. Me too, man. He was a good guy. Good guy. Breaks my heart. And later this year, I have a book coming out that you'll find interesting. It's called Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. And I've had like this surreal balancing act throughout my life where I've worked in wrestling, worked in teaching, worked in movies, and somehow juggled it all. And it's 100 stories I wrote mostly during the pandemic about guys like Johnny and Nikolai and Kowalski. While I was on the set doing The Wrestler, one of the guys I hung out with was Larry Sweeney, Ring of Honor's Larry Sweeney. The guy was a school teacher. He was a substitute teacher. He did the indie wrestling ROH on the weekends. And the guy was sharp, funny, charismatic, talented. He was like Bobby Heenan, this guy. I'm telling you, if you weren't an ROH fan, you missed Larry Sweeney, boy. So the guy hung himself. And I actually got in contact with Aronofsky. I said, you remember Larry Sweeney? And Darren said, yeah. And he was sad too, because the guy was a total package. Believe me. I mean, what a tragedy. So I have a piece on him. Just 100 pieces, just stuff that was, but it's not all grim. I mean, there's funny stuff in there. And but just a lot of people I wanted to honor. Nicole Bass. I was at her deathbed the night before they pulled the plug. Another dear friend, Melissa Coates. She was at my wedding. Yeah, a lot of people that left us too soon. And I think it's going to be a powerful book. I don't know Shane Douglas personally. Somebody asked the question just now. I've met him several times. Sharp guy, great talent. I was an ECW fan. Shane was amazing.
I don't know if you want to answer this as a Jimmy Valiant friend, but I would assume this is just because Bobby Heenan was a heel manager and Jimmy would have been competition to him, so it was probably kayfabe.
Um, I know Heenan's heat with Johnny Valiant. This is a strange story. Johnny was a legit stand-up comic, and he was always a joker and always telling jokes. And so Bobby Heenan's mom used to cook for the Valiants. Heenan managed the Valiants in the AWA. So Johnny goes to visit Bobby Heenan's mom in the hospital because he legitimately liked her and he wanted to be there. It was the right thing to do. So Heenan shows up at the hospital and says, Johnny, I really appreciate you visiting my mom. So Johnny, as a joke says, oh, I'm just here to meet you to get a ride to the airport. And he was kidding. And Heenan took it literally. And held a grudge for like 30 or 40 years. So I don't know Heenan's heat with Jimmy, but that was Heenan's heat with Johnny. So it kind of answered a different question. But I love Jimmy. Jimmy is a friend, and he's the sweetest guy in the world. And basically, you visit his wrestling camp in Shoresville, Virginia. He actually put me in his Hall of Fame, which is such an honor to me. It's like if somebody gave me like an honorary degree at Harvard, it wouldn't mean as much to me as Jimmy Valiant's camp, okay? So Jimmy has this beautiful wrestling camp on top of a mountain in Shoresville, Virginia. It's like Shangri-La, and it's like you're visiting like the holy monk. He's 79 years old. He's got the beard down to here. He's like the wise man on top of the mountain. I love Jimmy Valiant. I don't care that Bobby Heenan didn't. I love Jimmy Valiant, for the record. I hope he sees this.
Yeah, well, I actually interviewed him about a year or two ago, so you never know.
There's few talkers as great as Jimmy Valiant.
No, he was up there for sure, and I appreciate you giving us your time and sharing your thoughts on the movies you were involved with. I know you got your own podcast to do in a few minutes, so thanks again, and I'll let you close this up with whatever you want to say to the fans.
Well, one, I want to thank Hannibal and your work. I mean, you're honest. You put it all out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and much respect. Some of the WWE stuff, it's kind of whitewashed, and some of the other stuff is just so dark that there's an ugly side to wrestling. There's a beautiful side to wrestling. And when you're doing quality work, you tell all sides of it. And that's what you do. And I respect that. And, if some people can't handle, brutal honesty, then, it's on them. But I tell people, the wrestling world is the best and worst of everything. And, tell all sides of it, be honest, and don't pull punches, don't whitewash it, and you do that. And you have, quite the body of work, thousands and thousands of hours of work. And a lot of those guys are gone now. So it's meaningful. It's really meaningful. And, sometimes the fans get these strange misconceptions from social media. Like even I hear a lot, Ric Flair wrestled the same match every night of the week. That's nonsense. I saw Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. It was the greatest match I ever saw in 48 years of attending. Okay. And Flair and Steamboat was not the same as like Flair and Road Warrior Hawk, who was a powerhouse, or Flair and some guy who couldn't work. Believe me. I mean, yeah, of course, every wrestler does the signature moves. He's going to do the same couple of moves, but he was out there 20, 30, 40, 1 hour Broadways, the guy was out there. So, of course, you're going to see some of the same moves, but Ric Flair in the 80s, he was as great as virtually anybody. And if you need to wrap up, I'll leave you with this. I've interviewed many of the legends over the years, and I've done mountains of radio, not shoot interviews per se, but radio. And the guys that the legends revered, They say that the greatest of all time was Nature Boy Buddy Rogers and Prime Ray Stevens. Nature Boy Buddy Rogers and Prime Ray Stevens. And I understand this is, before the time of a lot of the fans today, but they were revered by the legends. And the other guys that the legends have, unbelievable respect for, Terry Funk, Dory Funk, Jack Briscoe, Harley Race, Nick Bockwinkel, Bruno, even though he wasn't as good a wrestler as some of the guys I just mentioned, because he was the accomplishments and he was a gentleman. He was respected as a person. And Kowalski, they loved Kowalski, and nobody ever said a bad word about Ivan Koloff. Believe me, this guy was as great as anybody in his prime. And they knew it. His peers knew it. And you talk to the legends, the legit legends, and Flair took a lot from Ray Stevens. Flair took a lot from Buddy Rogers. I'm sure he'd say it himself. And nothing wrong with that. You borrow from the best. But man, those guys. And again, I love what I thought was great in more recent years. Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson, Okada and Kenny Omega. This is wrestling elevated to art. And as far as tag teams, Midnight Express and Rock and Roll Express, that was art. Every night of the week, those guys killed.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us